first speaker will be Steve Shay, who's an adjunct professor in history, and he will be speaking on notions of republicanism in terms of thinking about the relationship between local, state, and county governments vis-a-vis the federal government, and his research that he's done on that.
The Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is not the first episode in history to try and decentralize government through extralegal means. In fact, the Oregon-born Posse Comitatus is 50 years ago, with the Sagebrush Rebellion following 40 years ago. What we're experiencing now is the intersection of politics and economics that have made the period from 2009 until now particularly active. Militia groups have formed, the Bundy Ranch has occurred, the Sugar Pine Mine in southern Oregon, the White Hope Mine in Montana, and now a National Wildlife Refuge. On January 2nd of 2016, a protest of about 300 people went to Burns, and they were supportive of the Hammond family. The Hammond family, just to give you a little bit of context, been found by a jury of their peers and a judge to be guilty of a federal law, went to prison, and because of mandatory minimums, the prosecutor brought the case back and forced them then to serve that mandatory minimum law. So that's part of why this community is so upset about this sentence, was that it seemed like they served their time and then they got called back again. Well, a small group of about 20 people broke off from this peaceful protest and started the occupation. They argued that a hard stand was needed as a necessary step for the community. And when you hear hard stand from militia, patriot groups, it generally means weapons or through force. And so what I want to talk about a little bit here is the county supremacist movement. Ammon Bundy yesterday stated in his press conference that he was looking at Article 4, Section 4, and Clause 1 of the Constitution. And I thought that was amusing because I was looking at the exact same thing. It read that the United States shall guarantee every state in this union a republican form of government. Now, Mr. Bundy and I disagree on what we mean by republican form of government, so I hope to add some historical context. There's four general elements to a republican form of government. The first one is the idea of individual rights. My students frequently tell me that the Bill of Rights is their favorite part of our government because it protects people's rights, and I think they have a good point. I think there's a lot to agree upon, in fact, here. The second element is the fact that there is the rule of law. This means that laws cannot be made up after the fact and applied to people that the government doesn't like. It also means that laws that have been passed in accordance to the Constitution are legal and civilly binding. Once again, we'll have some discussion about that. The third one, no kings, right? We all agree with that one. That's a good one. We're all enjoying that. And then the fourth one requires a little bit of explanation, which is popular rule, because there's actually two components here. The first one is a wide swath of the population votes. Now, when our nation started, it was largely white landowning males that could vote, but by the 1820s, they included white landless laborers as well. In the 1860s, African Americans, males were added to the Constitution. 1920s, of course, the women were added as well. 1924, Native Americans were allowed to vote. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act guaranteed access to all those who were eligible to vote. So that wide swath of the population voting is something that we've come to as Americans to treasure. The second element that I want to bring up about this idea of republicanism is, of course, office holders must face the people they represent in regularly scheduled elections, right? That you know when that election is going to be, so you have a chance to say yay to that representative, or I'd like to pass and do something else, okay? And so this is part of the political problem that exists in the occupation. Because the rule of law being applied by the occupiers is not the recognized law that most citizens follow. Scholars would call such a political theory extralegal. Bundy and the militias call it common law. And it's a type of law that is determined to decentralize government. Now, if the militias have no problem with a particular law or decision, then they follow what we recognize as the legislative branch, the executive branch, and then the judicial branch, right? And we've learned this all from the very beginning of our lives. But if they have a problem with a law, legal decision, or enforcement of a law, Then they turn to a self-fashioned parallel version of the government that they believe is equal and in some cases more powerful than any level of government. Believing in parallel governments is not illegal, but taking action might be. Let's take a look at legislative power for a moment. Prior to the Hammonds being sent back to prison, Ammon Bundy came to the community and he directed them to form what was called a committee of safety. He nominated people from the committee to take on the role of administrating this community in crisis. And so a vote by a very small slice of the population of the community was held, and it was determined that this committee of 6 people could call the militia in if they felt that the danger was high enough. This committee is currently divided. There's 6 of them. 3 are in favor of telling Bundy and the militia to leave, and the other 3 are not willing to make that decision yet. This act circumvents the role of county commissioners, and I would argue even the governor of the state. Let's take a look at the enforcement power. When the Hammonds were returned to prison, militias argued that the sheriff could stop the enforcement of the law based on the common law idea that the sheriff was the highest law enforcement official in the community and could overrule the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the BLM, the State Highway Patrol, and any other law enforcement that you could name. Bundy supporters, because he refused to take action against the FBI or prevent the Hammonds from going back to jail, have called him derelict in his duty, demanded his resignation. A supporter who was not part of the Committee of Safety, in fact, asked for the outside militia to come into the community and provide protection. And so as a result, more armed outsiders came into the county. The Idaho 3 Percenters, the Pacific Patriot Network, and several Oath Keepers have also responded. The militias, in order to act as the law enforcement in the community, must undermine the authority of the sheriff. And so they have consistently kind of chipped away at that over the past couple of weeks. Finally, the judicial power. When the Bundy occupiers took control, they also started a parallel court system. When the sheriff didn't take the action that they desired, the group formed a common law court. They brought in a self-styled judge from Colorado, and although they haven't been announcing this in the press, I think they've been having court sessions, and that these sessions are essentially verifying their particular legal view of their actions and justifying their position. Is this republicanism? Has a wide swath of the population voted in the county? Since 2008, about each November election has had about 3,000 people voting, maybe a little bit more. Only 4 times since 2008 did the 3 districts in Burns disagree on the outcome of an election. In other words, when they voted for president, all 3 of those districts voted for the same person in large numbers. When they voted against the legalization of marijuana, all 3 districts voted in large numbers against that. This is a politically unified community. This community is capable of the type of participation that we treasure in republicanism, and no danger presented by Ammon Bundy or anybody else should necessarily change that. Next question. Are there regular elections? People of the county have no clue when they can expect a referendum on Bundy or the militia's action. In particular, they have been very loud about the fact that they want the Idaho 3 Percenters to leave, the Pacific Patriot Network, and several of the Oath Keepers to go home. Bundy's own creation of the Committee of Safety did not face election, nor is there any scheduled election where the public can review their work. Self-styled experts are transported in from Florida and Colorado to be county judges. Where's the check on the power of these judges, who are not Harney County residents? And how long will they serve? We have to be sophisticated in how we deal with Bundy's occupiers and the militias. These people are smart and they're savvy, and they've also modified their tactics. They're very capable of using technology to their advantage by posting videos, Facebook pages, and so forth. They've spoken with media outlets at length. They've put the long guns away because militias scare local populations. They have articulate spokespeople who might be outsiders, but who speak to the local community about federal overreach and BLM issues. But their primary mode of operation goes against community involvement and republicanism. The occupation had no coordination with the local committee, and that's why they're so mad. The Committee of Safety, supposedly the assembly speaking for the people, did not call for the militia, a violation of their law. In fact, it wasn't even a member of the Harney County community. It was a radio talk show host from Cincinnati, Ohio, who called for the militia to come. They ignore the popular will of the residents to do this the right way. And I would argue that that is the Republican way, right? The small R Republican way. Now, my opinion doesn't matter much in the grand scheme of things, but there have been 3 times during this occupation that I've been upset. And I've been upset probably in a different way than many other people in this room. I grew up on a farm and a ranch in Montana, and I've been trained as a historian. First time I was upset was when they cut the fences. There's a Western code, good fences make good neighbors. And the fact that they cut the fences, and then it came out later that the rancher didn't want the fences cut, to me spoke of not paying attention to locals. Secondly, in the past couple of days, they have recommended to those who hold BLM grazing contracts that they should not sign their grazing contracts in the coming year and assert their independence from the government. This to me is economic suicide. It removes them from the protection of property law and contracts that have served this nation well. And then third, as a historian, I was upset with their argument that they would return the land to the rightful owners. The original owners are the Burns Paiute tribe. This is uncontestable. And in fact, they realized this weakness. Yesterday, they wanted to open negotiations with the tribe. Now, to me, it seems like the tribe, and I don't know for sure, but it seems like the tribe would feel the same way about the occupiers as the occupiers feel about negotiating with the FBI. Negotiations are going to be difficult, and a peaceful solution is far from certain. Who's the go-between? Who's the negotiator who can talk between all parties? I might be a little bit behind on my notes, all right? Federal and state employees are ultimately responsible to elected officials recognized by our Republican form of government. These employees may not agree with the law, but they believe in the rule of law. And they might also yearn for a change in leadership, but you know what? That might come with the next election, and that's the American way. Militias in Bundy are duty-bound, they feel, to protect the Constitution and the citizens as they see it. To take corrective action, they are advocating forming a parallel government that undermines the values of republicanism. Who can span this divide? We all want a peaceful solution. We all want an opening of negotiations. We all want to do it the right way. Harney County has suffered a great deal of stress and pain and loss already over the Hammonds. But more is going to be asked of this community to make these decisions. And I fear that this occupation will lead into March and eventually the summer. By the way, that image was the community voting for the militias to leave. When it was asked, who wants the militias to leave, that was the vote. As they think about these news events and making their decisions, I hope that our students, Oregonians, and others remember the long history of republicanism that has served our nation so well and helped us to create a more perfect union.